Okay, my name is Rodney Madison. This is the reflection that I have on the report that is due for the ethics class. I believe it is supposed to be due this week on the 27th, but I'll just begin. I'll be reading through my notes, so if you see me looking away from the camera, don't worry about it. So, the report by Scott Burns. It explores the history of events that happened in the United States about Daniel Jones and his report on the CIA torture events. He's seen most of the time wearing suits and sitting in offices and conference rooms. And he's being investigated about his findings of what he's seen through his reports, or what he noted through his reports about the torture by the CIA following the 9/11 attacks. It covers most of the political interests, and it explores a 6,700 page report that he did multiple investigations through several different people. The report involved graphic details of the interrogation program and the government detention center that needlessly and inefficiently brutalized its captives and kept these practices hidden internationally from the American people as well as the policymakers. The report also revealed how Barack Obama's administration was working to undermine the committee's efforts in making their findings public while uncovering the political agenda of Washington. So my internal response for this was I was pretty much upset viewing how they treated Daniel Jones and tried to discredit him and ruin his reputation by challenging anything that he found in his report simply because of the authority figures that could have been exposed throughout his report, and the practices that were being covered up as they covered multiple deaths throughout the program. And in his report, he attempted to expose most of these unethical practices that were being supervised by the U.S. government. Give me a second. I'm just going through my notes. The program was supervised by psychologists, which there were a number of times which he stated that through these psychologists overseeing the techniques, enhanced torture techniques, they were the ones that basically gave a, what do I want to say? I can't think of the word. They gave it a, give me 1 second, I'm trying to think of the word. They gave the authority to say what was right and what wasn't wrong, and they were the psychologists that were basically supposed to give a balance to the ethics in the program. So if they were going to say what was right and what was wrong, the point that some people ended up dying, that was clearly wrong, and they ignored that fact, and that's unethical, and those were the practices that Daniel Jones was trying to uncover and expose. And in that action, he actually was being discredited for trying to expose that. In the incidents that were being revealed throughout his report, there were mock burials, rectal rehydration, waterboarding, sleep deprivation. People were being burned, and it all kind of really gave me an internal idea that resembled a horror film. because in the reality of it all, this happened in our history and it was covered up. Give me a second, reading the notes. Most of the interrogation rooms were dirty, um, and they weren't fit for detainees to even be in them in the first place, let alone go through some of the horrific uh, practices of torture that they had to endure. I would assume that after most of these practices were revealed by Daniel Jones, that it's only limited the practices that have been involved. But from my experience with the military, I can almost assume that it's only a limitation. It hasn't been completely removed and all. They just come up with better ways of hiding it. Thoughts that really crossed my mind throughout this entire report was I was definitely irritated because it definitely brought upon internal feelings upon myself. Um, it didn't sit right with me how the focus was redirected from what Daniel Jones was trying to expose, and more so directed onto Daniel Jones himself to try to make anything that he tried to expose uh, discreditable, to try to say that uh, what he found had no relevance to uh, what the events actually were, because they wanted to make him seem like a bad person. Another part within most of all of this was there was a statement by President Barack Obama on August 2014 where he made a statement where we tortured some folks in one of his speeches. And this was a time during the U.S. administration was trying to release a filtered version of Daniel Jones's report. And in my understanding, I think the president was referring to the foreign captives at that detention center. And I believe that the statement that he made was just used to show the citizens that the government was working effectively towards avoiding incidences like that in the future. And that was only an implication, which like I said, from my experience with the military, I don't think that was the real case. Just the better way for them to hide it. So basically, after reading the report, I gathered from it that the government, in most cases, especially the way that they targeted Daniel Jones after he attempted to expose their practices, it just showed me that the government was 100% willing to cover up the deaths of some of the people that actually died throughout their practices, and the lengths they would go to not only cover up those deaths, but uh, try to discredit people who uh, attempted to expose them, such as Daniel Jones. Excuse me, I'm just reading the notes again. I'm at about 9 minutes right now. Ultimately, the government has most of the power to decide what they want to reveal to us as citizens. Um, but I believe that any information that concerns the well-being of our citizens or the well-being of any captive, it shouldn't be hidden, because I feel it comes down to how would I want to be treated if I was put in their position, or if any of my friends or family or anyone that I knew was put in that same position. I understand that comfort in those type of circumstances, considering it was in relation to the 9/11 attacks. Comfort should be minimized. I don't think they should be given five-star meals, but I also don't believe that these people should have been tortured to the point of death, especially knowing that some of the captives that were in this program uh, were innocent people. Um, some of the people that were in the program were women and children that had absolutely nothing to do with the 9/11 attacks, and they were simply just captive there for the color of their skin or the ethnic background that they shared with the captives that were a part of the 9/11 attacks. And I don't believe that that is ethical at all, that those people had to go through the same type of torture uh, for the actions of people that they had no connection with. Give me a second, still reading the notes. All right, so basically, my commentary on why I felt irritated was this is a personal story. I got a bit more time. I'm gonna try and rush through it. When I was in sixth grade, when the attacks happened, um, I didn't really feel as emotional about it because I was really young and it wasn't in my city. I didn't necessarily know what was going on. I was leaving the principal's office at that moment, and during that time for me, me growing up throughout my entire childhood, why I was irritated. I grew up with an emotionally abusive family, and one of my cousins, actually, while I was serving in the military, he ended up hanging himself, and it reminded me of when I was 12 years old, and I actually tried to hang myself due to an emotional uh, stress that I had going on in my life at that time. So while going through this report and seeing what Daniel had to go through, and then seeing what the people in that uh, program had to go through, it really irritated me on a personal level, just to see like how far some people mentally can be pushed, and they had absolutely no control over their lives, and some of the stuff they were being asked, uh, even though they had no connection to the 9/11 attacks, they simply began over time just agreeing to any uh, interrogation questions that they were being asked, just because they believed that it would let them be free. Um, and that's kind of my personal feelings on that. So when I apply the ethics code, and I had to see the clip on on the Abu Ghraib prisoner, Jamila Abbas. She spoke about when she was tortured by the U.S. And she stated that whatever you can see about her torture event in the media is almost like a drop of water in a grand sea in comparison to what she actually experienced. She said she faced most of the worst torture from female American soldiers. So when she was released 6 months after her detainment without any charges, she had to adapt back to her regular home, and she became bitter for no other reason other than her resentment on how she was treated throughout her detainment, because she was an innocent woman that had absolutely nothing to do with it, and she was still treated like the world's most dangerous criminal. Um, this caused her physical damage, which she had to seek medical attention from several doctors, and she explained that a different 16-year-old boy that she witnessed, who was also in the program, and was another innocent kid that ended up being released. He was accused of helping bin Laden at that time, and just to avoid any more torture from the soldiers, all he ended up doing over time was just agreeing to anything that the interrogator said. If they said he did something, he said he did it just to tell them, just to hope that any practices that they went through would stop. I also learned through a different clip that I saw that most of the pain that the survivors went through, the aftermath of that pain, especially in Jamila Abbas's case, where she still felt she was still experiencing torture due to her deteriorating health, even though she wasn't detained anymore. Most of the survivors were left with scars that reminded them about their traumatizing events that they went through. And I learned that the survivors were being punished for actions during their detainment for crimes that they didn't even commit, considering that 16-year-old boy who was accused of helping bin Laden, he simply only accepted any terms or statements that his interrogators said that he did just to make the torture stop. After reviewing the entire document of the aiding torture, there were 2 techniques profiled in it. There was physical abuse and threatening the detainees with harm of their family members and close friends. So in those techniques, it led to a mental disability called learned helplessness. And in that situation, whereby the detainees, they'd face persistent affect adverse I don't want to say that word. It basically made them lose hope of improving any conditions that they could have gone through just by going through most of the interrogating practices that they went through. Give me 1 second. I'm going a little bit over time. Most of the threatened detainees that were told their families will be harmed, they had to go through sexual assault and had to witness their own children being killed. And that made them all feel hopeless. So I believe that most of those events increased the level of torture along with the physical torture that they actually endured. So they went through a mental torture as well. When I review the document doing harm, there's a failure to prevent or report any of the torture that was being done or the harming of victims. They didn't report the failure to protect the lives and the health of the patients under the care of the brutality. And the interrogators didn't prevent the torture from any of the detainees. Instead, they continued to torture them more and more and forcing them to accept any mistakes that they made. And the interrogators also continued to harm them and beat them pretty brutally. The scenario with Jamila Abbas and the 16-year-old Syrian boy, they were beaten simply just for the fact that they were believed to have a connection or a support with bin Laden. They also failed to protect their lives and their and psychologically, on top of the physical torture that they endured, it was just as bad. So when they had to go through the physical, psychologically over time, they are almost permanently damaged because of that torture. Um, when the psychologists Mitchell and Jessen upheld the 5 general ethic principles, the principles stated that the psychologist shouldn't harm or protect the welfare or the rights of those that they worked for, and Mitchell and Jessen upheld benefits and non-maleficence by seeking accountability to ensure that people never experience abuse or torture as it happened before. And when I go down to the fidelity and the responsibility of it all, I feel that this role suggested that the psychologists do their duties with moral responsibility to help other people who work in their profession do their responsibilities in following ethic standards. I apologize. I'm trying to rush through this. I do have to be at work, which gives me very limited time, so I'm trying to get through this as quickly as possible, as coherently as possible, while trying to rush through my notes as well. So Mitchell and Jessen, they were also upheld fidelity and commitment, and they worked to stem from the efforts of the psychologists who prepared the soldiers in the United States for a potential capture. And through this, they subjected the soldiers to isolation, waterboarding, and insult, and put the soldiers through a training program such as this. So I have about 3 more bullet points to get through, which are integrity, justice, and respecting the rights and dignity of people. So I'm going to try to rush through this as quickly as possible. For my integrity, this is the ethical principle that psychologists should not misrepresent or deceive. There was an incident where the psychologists seemed to not uphold the principle of integrity, and there's where Gul Rahman was subjected to suffering and abuse with the CIA program. So the abuse led to his death and suffering of his family members. And however, before he died, he had asserted that psychologists Mitchell and Jessen proposed some of the methods he was claimed to. So other victims who claimed the psychologists proposed their sufferings were Muhammad Ahmed bin Saud and Salman Abdullah Salim. So when I go down to justice, justice on a broader consent related to the psychologist's responsibilities to be impartial and fair. So the psychologists were not fair, and they were very unbiased after the allegations from the 3 plaintiffs above. So Mitchell and Jessen argued that they were not aware of Ahmad and Abdullah's suffering. The signified and that signified that the two had proposed the suffering method for Gul Rahman, and that wasn't fair. So my respect the rights and dignity of people when it comes to this all was they were respecting the rights and dignity of people in the last principle, and psychologists should respect the rights to privacy, dignity, and confidentiality of the people they work with. So the 2 psychologists upheld this principle since they never provided any information concerning the people they work with. And that puts me at about 24. If you cut out any of the extra stuff that I put, that can be about 15 minutes. But I really wish I could re-record this, but this is my presentation, and I do apologize for the time. Thank you for listening to me.